Good afternoon. It's a beautiful day in Texas, and so I'm sitting outside to talk to you about the Institute for Faith, Science, and Leadership, which I am founding and will soon launch online and in the real world. But for now, this is a background piece on kind of what's the thinking behind the need for a new leadership model. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about the science behind the fractal leadership model. At the intersection of complexity, paradox, and fractals, future of leadership emerges that is decentralized, adaptive, and deeply human. Insights from these interconnected fields, found both in natural and social sciences, offer a new lens for leaders to navigate uncertainty and harness emergent behavior in organizations. Complexity reveals leadership is not a top-down function. Complexity theory describes how systems with many interacting parts, like a team or a market, produce unpredictable, emergent behavior. This challenges a traditional hierarchical leadership model where a single central leader is assumed to be in control. In a complex world, a single leader cannot possibly control every variable. Instead, leadership is a dynamic, collective, and contextual process where influence and authority are constantly negotiated and shifted. The future of leadership is not about one heroic leader having all the answers, but about a polyarchy where influence is distributed across many actors. Leaders who can influence and embrace this decision-making, empower local networks, and focus on shaping the context in which people interact rather than controlling the specific incomes will be successful. Paradox is the language of a complex reality. Paradoxes are contradictory yet interrelated elements that coexist and persist over time. Modern leaders face paradoxes like maintaining control while letting go, or pushing for change while insisting on continuity. Complexity theory reveals that these paradoxes are not anomalies, but are inherent to complex, adaptive systems. For example, a system needs both stability, continuity, and disruption, change, to evolve. A healthy organism, from a single cell to a complex organization, exists in a dynamic equilibrium of opposing forces. Leaders must reframe their thinking from either or to both and. Rather than trying to resolve paradoxical tensions, the most effective leaders learn to manage them and sustain the creative friction they generate. This skill of paradoxical leadership is the key to fostering innovation in a volatile world. Fractals offer a template for scalable organizational culture. Fractals are repeating geometric patterns found throughout nature where small-scale structures resemble the large-scale form. In organizations, a fractal culture means that the core values and principles held by the company as a whole are mirrored in the behavior of every team and individual, regardless of their level. Fractals are a visual representation of how complexity can operate with simple underlying rules. A complex adaptive system is often fractal, meaning the same simple rules of interaction govern the entire system at every level. This provides a mechanism for distributed leadership to maintain coherence without central control. A fractal leader creates a strong, clear organizational DNA or purpose, and then trusts that these core values will repeat and self-organize across the organization. This shifts the leader's role from top-down manager to a tuning fork, setting the frequency, allowing every member to align with the core mission. Here are some examples. A traditional hierarchical corporation faces the paradox of needing both rapid innovation, requiring decentralization, and strict brand control, requiring centralization. The complexity insight is acknowledge that the organization is a complex, adaptive system and that radical innovation cannot be centrally dictated. Emergent creativity will happen at the edges in local teams and customer-facing units. The fractal insight is that instead of fighting this decentralization, the leader embeds the core brand story and values, the organizational DNA in every small team. This ensures that even as teams act with greater autonomy, their innovations will still be coherent with the company's overall identity. Paradoxical leadership solution is: the leader embraces the paradox of centralized decentralization. They maintain brand control through simple, universally shared principles, that's the fractal, but empower and resource small, autonomous teams to experiment freely, the complexity. The leader becomes a facilitator, nurturing the company's DNA rather than controlling every output. Another example: a leader's team is demotivated because they feel micromanaged, but when given too much freedom, productivity drops. The leader faces the paradox of needing both closeness and distance with their direct reports. The fractal insight is this: the leader applies the fractal principle of self-similarity to team dynamics. They realize that the same patterns of motivation and engagement that work for the large organization can be scaled down. The solution doesn't lie in a top-down mandate, but in nurturing the same sense of ownership and purpose within each team member. The paradoxical leadership solution is this: the leader practices maintaining distance while building closeness. They set clear shared objectives, that's the distance, but then build deep personal relationships with team members, focusing on the individual needs and growth, that's the closeness. By cultivating trust and shared purpose, the team can manage its own workflow and performance without constant oversight. Here's the complexity insight: the leader understands that human interactions are a complex adaptive system. They don't try to solve the motivational problem with a single linear intervention like a bonus. Instead, they focus on creating a fertile environment, a culture of shared purpose, psychological safety, and clear values from which motivation and productivity can emerge naturally. The future of leadership. The convergence of these concepts paints a picture of a future leader who is more of a systems gardener than a master architect. This leader does not seek to impose order, but to cultivate the conditions from which it can emerge. They embrace complexity by letting go of linear control and acknowledge the power of emergent, unpredictable change. They master paradox by holding contradictory truths in dynamic equilibrium and recognizing that tension is a source of creativity, not a problem to be solved. They leverage fractals by imbuing the organization with a core purpose that empowers every individual and team to lead from within, creating self-similar, resilient culture that scales naturally. This new leadership paradigm replaces the desire for absolute control with a deep appreciation for coherence, resilience, and the power of distributed action. At the intersection of complexity, paradox, and fractals, a future of leadership emerges that is decentralized, adaptive, and deeply human. Insights from these interconnected fields, found both natural and social sciences, offer a new lens for leaders to navigate uncertainty and harness emergent behavior in organizations. In an interconnected world of uncertainty, a new model of leadership is emerging that integrates complexity, paradox, and fractals. This approach, decentralized, adaptive, and human-centered, moves beyond traditional hierarchies by embracing emergent behavior and valuing a system's capacity to evolve. Complexity. Complexity theory views organizations not as machines to be centrally controlled, but as complex adaptive systems, CAS. In a CAS, leadership is not confined to a single person, but is a dynamic process involving all participants. What this means for leaders: enable rather than dictate. Instead of enforcing rigid plans, modern leaders create a fertile environment where innovation can emerge from employee interactions. Embrace uncertainty. In complex environments, outcomes cannot be fully predicted. Leaders must accept this reality and help guide teams to cope with ambiguity. This requires a shift from seeking control to focusing on adaptability. Foster autonomy and self-responsibility. Complexity leadership fosters autonomy and responsibility among individuals, harnessing the intelligence of the entire system rather than relying on the knowledge of a few at the top. and paradox, embracing both and thinking. Paradoxical leadership embraces competing yet interrelated demands simultaneously. Instead of choosing between two opposing ideas, leaders use both and thinking to find a synergistic path forward. Key paradoxical tensions that leaders must navigate include control and empowerment. A leader must balance enforcing work requirements, giving employees flexibility and autonomy to innovate. Second, uniformity and individualization. Leaders must treat employees uniformly and equitably while also individualizing consideration based on their unique skills and needs. And finally, distance and closeness. Successful leaders find a balance between maintaining professional distance and fostering personal closeness with their teams. Aligning a shared purpose at every level is part of the fractal understanding of business leadership. In nature, fractals are self-repeating patterns that appear the same at every level of magnification, from a small leaf to an entire tree. A fractal organization applies this concept by aligning shared purpose and core values at every level, from the C-suite to individual teams. Here's the power of fractal organizations. They promote scalability and agility by having small autonomous teams, mini organizations, that operate with the same core purpose and principles as the larger whole. The organization can scale without losing its sense of purpose or agility. Second, it increases information flow. Fractal organizations break down information silos and encourage constant communication, which is vital for quick adaptation in a changing environment. And finally, fractal leadership fosters self-organization. When employees share a common purpose, they can self-organize and make decisions collectively in response to new challenges. This pushes leadership out into the organization rather than hoarding it at the top. The human element. The bridge between complex principles integrating complexity, paradox, and fractal concepts is not just about adopting new models, it's about recentering leadership around human relationships and adaptability. Human-centered leadership connects the three concepts. It navigates complexity with empathy. Human-centered leaders prioritize, and authorize emotional intelligence, enabling them to understand and guide people through the messiness of complex adaptive systems. It also resolves paradoxes with emotional intelligence. By cultivating empathy, leaders can navigate the tensions of paradoxical demands while ensuring that employees feel understood and valued. And finally, paradoxical leadership maintains alignment with a shared purpose. A strong shared purpose, reinforced through honest communication and a focus on human well-being, assures that each person feels valued and valuable. Here are some examples of companies that embrace complexity in leadership. Hire. The Chinese appliance manufacturer has famously restructured a hierarchy into a network of over 4,000 self-managing micro-enterprises, a system known as Rendan He. The complexity aspect is Hire operates as a complex adaptive system with each micro-enterprise having the autonomy to respond directly to customer needs and market signals. Emergent behavior. This decentralized model enables innovation to emerge from the market edge rather than being dictated from the top. And Hire uses what they call the jellyfish model. A manager at Hire compared the organization to a jellyfish, noting that while there was no central brain, a tentacles discovery triggers the entire organization to respond. The second example is Spotify. The music streaming services organizational model, defined by its squads, tribes, chapters, and guilds, is a well-known example of an agile structure built for complexity. The autonomous, cross-functional squads operate with a high degree of independence, making rapid decisions without top-down approval. Senior leaders at Spotify focus on setting clear principles and an overarching strategy, allowing individual teams the freedom to experiment and innovate while remaining aligned with the company's core mission. Another example of companies navigating paradox is Netflix. The company's famous freedom and responsibility culture is a prime example of managing a deep-seated paradox. The paradox is Netflix offers its employees a high degree of autonomy and lavish benefits, but this freedom is balanced by an intense, high-performance environment. The paradox is that high freedom is linked to high accountabilities. And this is the balancing act. The company's controversial keeper test, where managers are expected to fire, quote, adequately informing, unquote, employees to find superb ones, exemplifies this tension between employee empowerment and extreme accountability. Another example is Amazon. Retail giant's culture is rooted in a fundamental paradox: innovation through combative efficiency. And what's the paradox? Amazon operates with a relentless focus on customer obsession innovation, but has been criticized for a demanding and at times harsh internal environment. This creates a tension between the company's forward-looking, innovative self-image and a more Darwinian, competitive reality. The balancing act? It combines a data-driven approach to efficiency with a both-and thinking about its future, such as building a massive logistics network and a cloud computing business. Here are a couple examples of companies with fractal structures. Visa. The organization founded by D. Hock with a chaotic structure, a term combining chaos and order, which essentially functioned as a fractal. Before it went public, Visa was a self-organizing, self-governing network of member banks. Its structure repeated itself at various levels, balancing the interest of thousands of autonomous businesses while maintaining the integrity of the overall network. And another example of a company with a fractal structure is W.L. Gore & Associates, known for its Gore-Tex fabric. This company famously operates as a lattice-based rather than hierarchical organization. The flat, decentralized model empowers associates to organize themselves into teams and projects with no formal bosses or chains of command. This structure allows the company to grow in a fractal-like manner with new mini businesses or teams forming and repeating the core company structure and principles at different scales. And finally, Pixar. While not a pure fractal, the film studio has been described as using fractal elements in its creative process. The fractal structure is that the company has core leaders at the center, but each film is run as an autonomous business unit with its own director and team. The success of this model relies on the autonomous teams repeating a core set of creative and technical principles, allowing for consistent quality across diverse creative projects. So that's a short summary of the underlying thinking behind the fractal leadership model. I would encourage you to continue to follow me for more updates as our leadership model changes and evolves in response to feedback from our clients and customers, and I look forward to talking with you more at another time. Have a nice weekend. For more information,